I wanted to spend a few minutes today discussing a significant divergence. We're seeing the same kind of crazy stock market behavior that led to the late 90s tech bubble and subsequent crash. I'm sure many of you were around in the late 90s and remember the craziness. I always like to think of the Pets.com sock puppet when I think about the bubble of the 90s. He was everywhere, including Super Bowl commercials. How a company that didn't make any money could afford a Super Bowl spot can only be explained by one thing: reckless use of shareholder funds. But hey, the casino was open, the drinks were flowing, and the gamblers loved the thrill of the game. What I'm plotting here is a comparison of the returns of the Russell 1000 Growth Index versus the Russell 1000 Value Index. This is total return, which includes both change in share prices as well as dividend payments. What you can see is that they trended together pretty nicely until late 2015, and then they diverged significantly. From 2010 through the end of 2015, both indices turned in investors $10,000 into about $20,000. However, afterwards, the value stocks increased the investors' wealth to about $25,000, and the growth stocks increased it to $45,000. This is really quite a remarkable divergence that is explained much more by people being willing to pay much higher prices for certain growth stocks over time than it is explained by actual earnings growth. So let's take a look at how this divergence compares to the late 1990s. Here is a chart of the Wilshire U.S. Large Cap Growth Index divided by the Wilshire Value Index. Notice the behavior on the right after the year 2015. The ratio does seem to be going parabolic, just like it did in the late 1990s. Of course, the funny thing about parabolic moves is that they can go on for quite a long period of time and go farther than anyone thinks is possible. We may see this divergence continue to grow until, just as in the late 1990s, it ends in tears for a lot of people. We may continue to see the stock market plow ahead as a result of these growth stocks and the speculative fever around them. But which stocks am I talking about? Which ones are driving the market higher? Here on the left is shown the top 10 holdings of the Russell 1000 Growth Index. Notice that these 10 companies represent more than 40% of the index. To me, that's not diversification. But it is a sure sign that the price of certain companies have become so overblown that it is affecting the composition of the index. When we see big moves in the S&P 500, it is largely a reflection of what is happening to these 10 stocks. And look at the crazy valuations of these 10 stocks. Out of all of them, only one has a price-to-earnings multiple that is less than 20. The rest of them have P/E ratios that are really quite high. Amazon has a price-to-earnings ratio of 152. This means that investors are willing to pay 152 times a year's worth of company earnings for the stock. Without continuous and tremendous growth in earnings, it will take a lifetime to recoup an investment in that stock if it is just held and not sold to someone else. Looking over at the right, we can see that the entire index has quite a high price-to-earnings multiple. It's over 33, so it's really not just these 10 stocks, it's growth stocks in general. And the dividend yield? It's almost as small as it was in the late 1990s. Investors are buying these stocks not for current cash flow or even eventual cash flow. They are buying these stocks because they are betting that they will be able to sell them for far more to someone else later. Will they succeed? Maybe. But at some point there will be bag holders. So if you decide that you are going to allocate any of your wealth to stocks, might I suggest considering value instead of growth? That is, unless you like bags. I wanted